Hello, everyone. This is Ronnie Caldwell and Be Good Leadership. If we don't have perspective, long term perspective, and a diverse perspective, we miss out. If you are feeling an amazing amount of anxiety, if you can't right size that anxiety, if much of our stress and our anger and our frustration, as you're feeling right now, is caused due to a lack of perspective, your inability sometimes to make wise decisions, to decide on a decision and move forward with it, is a lack of perspective. And what we're going to talk about today is how do we cultivate that mindset? The mindset of perspective to make sure that we're able to move forward with wisdom and that we're able to actually not never feel anxiety, but we're able to right size that anxiety. So I want to start with a story, talk a little bit about right sizing anxiety. So years ago, when I was still teaching at the American International School of Chennai in India, I had a student come to me, and he was a student from California and had been at a school that I think pretty much he was almost always getting A's, 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 A's. New kid, great kid, he was awesome. And we were in AP Modern World History. AP Modern World History, he was in 10th grade. We have a unit exam. He comes in a little bit after the test was returned. We had done reviews on it, gotten feedback, had good discussions. He chose a time to come and see me all alone, all by himself. And when he came in, I said, "Hey, what's going on? How can I help, man?" And he had tears in his eyes. And I was like, "Hey, what's going on? How can I help? Are you okay?" And he said, "I got an 87." I said, "Yeah?" He says, "It's a B. I've never gotten a B before on a test." And he was in tears and he was trembling, literally trembling. And he went on to express and talk to me about how the college he wanted to go to, the GPA he needed to have, all these different things that were just boiling up inside of him. And I decided to say to him, "Hey, it's a test in AP Modern World History. You're in 10th grade." And I said, 10 years from now, I said, how old are you? He said, 16. I said, okay, when you're 26 years old, if you are still thinking and still angry about the B you got on a unit test in AP Modern World History when you were in 10th grade, a whole host of other things must have gone wrong in your life, because this is not the thing to be in a crisis about. This is not a disaster. And 100%, we understand that as an adolescent, so much is heightened, right? So much of our feelings heightened. We know that brain research tells us they can't avoid it. Everything is kind of bigger than it needs to be. However, my job as a teacher, my job as an adult, my job as a parent, my job as a good friend is to help each other right size anxiety. And we can't do that if we lose perspective. And so the first type of perspective, that example I gave there, was trying to think of a long-term perspective. We lose this oftentimes, especially in schools, when we catastrophize everything and make everything a particular crisis. That this is the thing. We've got to rush with this new initiative. We've got to change this right now just because I came from a different school and they did it differently there. And you might see this in organizations as well. I know in the private sector, the same thing happens. New employee comes in and, "Hey, we did this completely differently in my last place. And so that must have been the right way. And the way you're doing it is wrong. And we have to change it now." But we rush to our own peril. As Aesop's fable told us, slow and steady wins the race. The turtle can beat the hare. But it takes time. It takes persistence, and it takes a long-term perspective. If you think how often we've gaslit our employees into thinking that if they don't do this right now, things will fall apart. We're doing a disservice to the students. But how many students, through whatever initiatives that we thought were a crisis level situation at the time, have done fine? How many have gotten an education? How many students who are currently in schools that you're not in who are doing things differently than the school that you're at have still gotten an education, are matriculating to the same universities that your school is matriculating kids to? How many have gone on and lived fine lives? How many of the things that you were mad about, that you thought were disasters, that you decided to yell at, maybe even hurt some relationships of your own? How many can you not even remember exactly what you were mad about? How many of those things right now don't seem to be a big issue? I'll ask again, how many times have you been mad about something on Monday, told everybody what you were mad about, only to feel not the same way at all by Wednesday, or sometimes even Tuesday? That's what we're talking about when we talk about long-term perspective. The reason we need it, the reason we need to look at it, is because we have a tendency to create disasters, to create suffering in our imagination. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, said we suffer more from the things within our imagination than we do in reality. And this happens because we fail to take the long-term perspective. And as a leader, or as someone who wants to be a benefit for not just yourself, your own mind, but also for others, having that long-term perspective is so important. A simple technique for cultivating a long-term perspective is what I call the 10-10-10. I learned it years ago, but it is to ask yourself simply this. In any kind of situation where you're feeling like, oh my God, this is the end of the world here, sit yourself down and write, how will I feel about this in 10 days? Then, how might I feel about this in 10 weeks? And then 10 months. And by doing that, you focus in on, is this really going to be the biggest of deals? And you can also do a little cheat and say, what was going on 10 months ago? What was I angry about 10 months ago? What was I sure was going to cause me the greatest amount of anxiety, harm, pain 10 months ago? And we can slow ourselves down. And we can start to think in a long-term way. And we can start to right-size our anxieties. That's the first one. Now, the second type of perspective that's also very, very important is the diversity of perspective. I've said it before and I'll say it again. None of us are able to accomplish what we want to accomplish in this life alone. We are all dependent on other people. And we spend the most time in our own head, speaking to ourselves, listening to ourselves. But if we're going to gain wisdom, if we're going to gain a better understanding in our decision making and the context in which we're making decisions, we have to listen to other people. We have to see what other people see because they're seeing things, they're paying attention to things that we are not paying attention to. They have experiences that we haven't had. They have a perspective that we don't know unless we ask. And so it is all about that. It is all about, I have been in the situation before simply where I have sat for hours coming up with an idea, with a plan, really thinking it through and deciding I've got it. I've got the best plan to go forward, only to realize that once I said, hey guys, this is what we're going to go with, this is what I've decided, that there were so many holes, that there were things I never even considered. People were asking questions that I couldn't answer. And yes, I was embarrassed. Yes, that was a situation in which I felt, oh my God, I look like a fool in front of everyone. However, I could have avoided that very early on by when I got going, okay, here's some clarity around my idea, but not to come to anybody and say, hey, I've come up with this on my own and this is what we're doing, but rather, what do you think about this? Where am I wrong? I think that one of the things we can do for this diversity of perspective, what we can start to ask ourselves whenever we're coming to a decision is this: what don't I know? What am I not seeing? And who can teach me? What don't I know? What am I not seeing? And who can teach me? And this gives you a perspective of who you should ask. Because not everybody needs to be asked about every single decision you make. But we should gather other people's perspectives because we don't know how they're experiencing the same thing. Having a perspective also allows us to have some empathy. Gaining a perspective also allows us to learn. Gaining the knowledge of others helps us build together as a team, and we become more collectively wise. So there it is. Perspective is a mindset we have to cultivate. We have to show up in the world craving to gain the perspective of others. And how do we practice that? We practice it by cultivating a long-term perspective, by asking ourselves, what does this look like 10 days from now, 10 weeks from now, 10 months from now? You can go 10 years if you like. But we take a long-term perspective, and we try to take a diverse perspective. We try to get as many other viewpoints that are important to the topic as possible before moving forward. So we become less anxious, and we develop more calm, and we become more wise. And we can do that every single day by cultivating the mindset of perspective. Be good.